Hi, and welcome back to the VALK storytelling workshop with Dr. Oliver Mbayi, where we are taking a look at what it takes to be a good storyteller. And we're also looking at um, different types of storytelling techniques. I'm just going to go through a few of them just in case you missed any of the sessions. We had an assignment, and the assignment was um, tell your story. Now, some of us have been able to do that successfully, where others have not. No, I'm kidding. We are actually here learning some basic principles of storytelling. And one of them, and principle number one, is to build the story around a good plot. The second is to create characters that the audience will care about. And number three is to have good dialogue that moves the story along. And we have Oliver, who is joining us today and giving us more insight as we tell our stories as to how we can achieve these three principles better and in our own unique way. Thank you so much for joining us, Oliver. I'd like to hand it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Jazz, and thank you, Ali, for sharing your power stories. And right now, the team establishes that Mongola told us stories of his life. Listening to us point out, for instance, when Andrew was putting across what he felt he wanted to hear more is a point where we are feeling, and was feeling that this is the story of your life you would have wanted to hear, at the end of the day. Mongola, when this was put across, how did you feel? I know you noticed you moved in so fast, start telling about so many things about, the bullying that was, and all that, the whole detail of rugby. There are all those framing and plots that actually more or less came to your beat like, hey, if this particular audience wanted this particular story, then I've not done this person justice. There's a lot that I should have given.
Yeah,
Right?
that's the feeling I got. Like, oh, now you're telling me you mean you wanted to know more about this or that
Right.
or the other. Wow. You kind
Right.
of feel you're encouraged. You're kind of thinking, man, I should put it all together for them. I wish I could just compress it in a nice,
Right.
short story, so to speak.
And I would try to realize that if you had listened to the entire stories of your life, we can be coming here every week for the next 1 year. Because this is amazing, and will definitely be present because, hey, one story lead to the next. Personally, when you picked up, you said something about Aga Khan being
Yes,
born at
Aga Khan Hospital.
hospital, and what
Yeah.
came to my head was like, oh, in the 60s, Aga Khan was still, you know, was actually already serving us, and all that. I really wanted to hear more
Yes.
stories about
Oh,
Aga
about
Khan
Aga
in
Khan.
the 60s, at the end of it. So to me, the introduction pointing out Aga Khan, I sat back and was like, oh, let me hear the story of the Aga Khan Hospital. And then while I was still held on Aga Khan Hospital,
Yeah.
you are in Mariakani, South B.
Yes, yes. South B.
And that took me to another imagerization. Okay, why? But then I was struggling, but then I have some imagerization about, Mariakani. I know I used to holiday around there at the Mata Hospital where my uncle used to work.
Yes, yes. Mata
Next to
was
it,
just behind
yeah,
us.
right. And then later on we had some informal settlement, developed around the hospital. I think those were the ones providing labor for the middle class that was. So a lot of memories came in, and I wanted you to dwell around there. But then again, you're making this particular story sacred. So every story you dived in, and then you take us to Nairobi Primary, which is another whole story, and within Nairobi Primary, you notice that there was a story of art.
Yeah.
Of course, we had other stories, which were so many, but there was a story of art, but still not give it that satisfactory bit. And then before we knew it, you were running where? to a rugby school.
To Lenana. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And,
traditional rugby school. Yeah, Lenana.
yeah, and you know, within that particular bit, you can give so many stories of your life, you know, at this particular point. I want to believe there was even a time you felt like leaving school, you know, and not being in school before you got used and became a citizen of the school, you know, in respect to the culture and all that. And there is a lot you'd say, and pro and good, and things, I mean, that were, and the bad things that were. And anybody watching you get you at a point where you are anxious. And you definitely felt anxious. And why were you anxious? Because there's a time frame. And within this particular time frame, you need to tell all your stories. And you are not in a position to establish a story that you feel, this is the story I'm going to explore at this particular moment. This is the story of my life that I think this particular audience should hear. And as a result, what happened? It tampered with the plot of your story, and it cluttered.
Yes, it did.
So the audience is there because you have this presence, yes, and so they are resigning, yes, okay, they are good stories, but then they are resigning because these particular stories are not coming home.
Yeah.
And then again, you feel
frustrated
about that.
They need flesh.
Yes, that I'm not doing my audience, you know. Why? So you ended up blaming what? Time.
Time.
Yes. You feel, hey guys, you should have given me at least 30 minutes, I tell you my story.
Yes, exactly.
To an extent, right?
Yeah.
Why didn't you just work with one of the stories?
I think, well, firstly, because I wasn't at the second, I think the workshop before this one. So I've kind of just stumbled in from what we had when we were at Shalom.
Yeah, and unfortunately, everybody has been stumbling in, don't worry.
Yeah, so you know, I was kind of, so I wondered, wow, my story, I'm 60 years old.
Right.
What do I just tell them about life in kindergarten or in Maria A, or in my teenage years when I was growing up, discovering booze, discovering chicks, discovering this, you know, all those going to house parties, you know, those were very interesting.
Why did you not choose? Why did you not choose that?
I'm just realizing, hindsight, it's 2020. Now is when I'm realizing maybe I should have shared my teenage years. You guys would have been laughing.
I mean, and with all due respect, sometimes you can even share the story that was told to you when you were at the Aga Khan place, what happened, you know, and all that.
Or at Aga Khan Hospital.
A particular process, and by the time, you know, you are being brought home, that to me is a story that probably would have been told still, you know, at the end of it. However, there you are saying you had that trouble of establishing the story. And the minute you start having that trouble of establishing the story, guys, just give me a minute, I turn on lights here. The minute you have a problem of establishing the story, what happens in this particular bit? You used a lot of energy.
Okay.
Right. And when you're using a lot of energy, where are we now taking our energy in this particular respect? We are taking to the wrong thing when our energy should be what? On the story. And a number of times that happens, even in the conventional storytelling bit, a number of times that happens where people basically just simply don't know whether they should actually be pursuing a particular aspect of the story they've told before within this particular audience lining. And if I was to ask, you know, just the way Andrew put across, if I was to ask the team, and sometimes we establish stories from a team bit, which part of these particular stories would you have wanted to hear more? Just in mentioning, team. Especially those who are in from the beginning.
I think
I know Andrew wanted,
I was just going to say, Andrew, I think you have particular spots that you'd have loved to hear. So let's start with you.
Well, I came in halfway through, so the fact that he mentioned he went to a rugby school and emphasized that. I was in a school where rugby were always beaten. So were you the beneficiary of being at a rugby school? So I wanted to hear that. And the fact that he married a lady from the western side of the country, you know, I could saw he lit up when he said that. So I wanted to know more about that. Thank you.
And when Andrew just putting across, you realize when we are having a story, can our story stick to one theme? If it has many themes, then the audience won't know which one to pursue. There is a way the audience wants to really project to a particular, but then now, hey, I thought we are here. Why are we here already? You know, at the end of the day. So if it was a case of a rugby school, which to me was another story being introduced, a rugby school. So if the introduction to this particular story, a rugby school, then I'm feeling that the story of your life is going to be around what? Rugby. And so a number of schools will be called in, you know, or you may pick a particular day when your school was beaten by Nairobi school, you know, how the pain would be, you know, at the end of the day. It was almost like what they call the Mashemeji Derby thing. So, and I think to me, this would be a very interesting narrative, you know, at the end of the day, just taking you to that particular moment, you know, and bring us the mood, you know, and having us simply, you know, be happy with the particular characters. In this particular case, would be talking about, you know, the students in Lenana or RVA or probably Nairobi School, you know, and all that, or Upper Hill, which, you know, once in a while, Jamhuri, you know, they were what the opponent, I believe, you know, I think Highway and things like so. That's what the story would have, you know, the introduction was the rugby school, you know. So how does the introduction anchor us to the story? Like the initial introduction of what? The Aga Khan. You know, and then all of a sudden Aga Khan was not even part of the story. And this is where the introduction was. And see, this kept on frustrating you every given time because every point, I like the way you introduced the stories. I mean, anybody who's not been to South Bay back in the day, never lived in the heartbeat, you know, you talked about, you know, blah, 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 Maria Kani, South Bay. Then, hey, and then somehow you went into a little placing, but I feel I would have wanted to hear the story then. I believe back in the day, that was a major middle class place, you know, at the end of it. All these happenings, you know, why did we run away from that? So actually, and you've already answered that for us, you know, how it frustrated you. If each of these particular stories thought it was worth being given what? Time. But because of our contextualization, you know, sometimes we feel that the audience need to hear everything of the story. Last time when I shared a story about the hare and the tortoise, I said it has 4 scenes. And if I struggle to tell everything within that particular time, it will not have served its purpose. Why did I tell that story at that particular moment? And what's the time that I'm having for this particular story? So that to me, time should not compromise my story. How am I going to frame this particular story within the time I've been given this particular minutes? All right. So this is my story that will actually serve these particular minutes. And so I'll fix it within this particular pack. And so whether you are telling me to tell a story for 1 minute, it should not be a frustrating thing. The story of my life, you want to hear the story of my life for 1 minute? What actually do I feel I need to share with you? And so am I ready to share with you this particular part of my story? And that's how we do extracts. You know, you have a heartbeat, you know, it's like, okay, I need to have these particular people journey with my story. And this story is so vast. So how am I going to do for them an extract that is satisfactory? When I look at it, I feel fulfilled. And those are many a times we really look at the extras like, no, the extract, it's not telling the story at all. You know, and you have to, and by the way, when it fails to tell the story, it kills a big thing. You know, and people more or less move on to the next stage. And so time constraint is something that we really need to factor in when we are shaping our stories in this particular context. And our story is our stories, at the end of the day. And that's why, for instance, Hollywood has always told stories and they continue to tell stories. Others, they'd have exhausted them because within this particular, and sometimes you notice, they'll come and tell a story and then they'll tell us there is a part 2 or a second bit of this particular story. And we all show up like, oh, there's this other, but if we exhausted everything, in a particular story, then there is no need for in that particular line. So, for instance, if you were to pay attention and just give us a story about rugby, I don't think we'll have room to come and tell us part 2 of rugby. It's the mistake of coming to America. Remember the story of
Eddie Murphy?
Eddie Murphy.
Yes.
Eddie Murphy, desperately thought that his story had a second coming. And what happens at the end of the day? We're like, you've already told us this.
That's the story.
So it turns out that now it's more boring than the first one because
the first
there is
one,
to be told, at the end of it.
Exactly.
And there are those ones who excelled, and those who've excelled are people who actually do for us series.
Yes. Yeah.
And they really capitalize on that. So to me, if I'm to listen to the stories you've given us, we could have very interesting series of your stories, and hey, would be glued to it. And I believe if you've not written a book about your life, maybe you may think about that, tell that particular story. Hey, we'll go through the journey, from Aga Khan, and all that, and that particular build-up. Hey,
okay.
And to me, this was just simply lovely. You want to say something?
No, I'm just saying thank you for that. I mean, the fact that you're saying maybe I should write some memoirs. Who knows? I mean, my
every given time I tell people part of my stories are actually like, why am I not writing, about me? Why am I not? Because we have very interesting stories. Sometimes really struggle to start reinventing stories when you are a story to be read. Very interesting things that are just simply going quiet. And you see, like a team, we are feeling that there's more would actually listen to, and hear from me. And so back again, what we are paying attention to is the energy of the narrator. To me, you had the energy of the narrator, very impressive. You remember to be a narrator. But what came out is that the narrator got frustrated. Why? Because of the habit of aspects of shaping the story. I think 2 of the components, you got them so well. I liked it when just gave us the whole logo. But now, when the plot throws you out and don't know how to more or less construct it, and all that, because at a point you are feeling like you're not giving, the best to your audience, at the end of the day, because you want to give them almost everything of story, So again, you get frustrated. Let the audience come back some other day.
Thank you, Oliver. I appreciate your critique. And
very soon for me, when we meet, I want to hear the rugby school.
Okay. You're on.
That's the chapter I really want to read.
Okay, I'm going to share. We're going to sit and have a coffee and I'll share with you.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Wonderful. Right. I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you. Team members, are we here?
Yes, we are. It's so interesting that the gentlemen are the ones who picked up on rugby. I thought this was a story about art. And I was waiting to hear more about how the art teacher was like his wife. Like I had already created my own story, actually.
Wow.
I got a completely different way.
There you go.
So
we need more stories about the art.
Yeah.
And just did you notice that he was so passionate about the teacher?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. In fact, just recently, about 3 years ago, a group of old students actually invited her to Nairobi. She stays in Mombasa. So we bought her a first class ticket. We brought her up to Nairobi, put her up at Pan Africa Hotel.
Wow.
And we met her at Nairobi Club, and we feted her. And you know, I was seeing former students who I last saw in 1976.
Get it.
I'm telling you. She, you know, I was amazed to see my seniors who I last saw in 76, but whose work I remember very well. And they all came. People took time out on a Saturday to come and see her and fed her and, you know, speak their mind and from their hearts.
Wow.
That's how much of an impact she had on us.
You know, the way you're putting that, I'm saying, I'm really sorry that we punished you, because I think this part of the story really would like to tell too. You know,
Wow.
every bit of this particular story is just up there.
Yeah.
Again, back to our bit here, it's like that's
Yeah.
another chapter that's exhaustive, and I don't think as we put across these, jazz would really love to hear that particular bit, you know, and how the other people were shaped into art, you know, who were these particular people who took that particular path, you know, the why they came in and how they are actually more or less, probably some of them are just simply living art, you know, in a case of appreciating art or
Yeah.
doing it in this particular bit, you know,
You know,
a
the
sense of
interesting,
aesthetic
yeah.
that was planted, you know.
Yeah, and the
So
interesting thing is some of them ended up being engineers, lawyers, but they just took art to raise their grade, to improve their grade. And they got A's in art, but they ended up being engineers, lawyers, architects, you know. So that was another interesting bit.
and can we hear the rest of us when you're listening to Ali? Do you hear that presence of the voice and the mechanization, how naturally it just flows in? The presence he has to that particular moment, guys. Can we follow up on that? Why? Because there's that ownership of that particular story. All right. And all said and done, in fact, in this story, for the 3 minutes you've given it, not still be enough. So you may need to choose a particular path. You may
Yeah, I
need to
think
choose
so.
a
Yeah.
particular
Yeah.
aspect of that particular story of art, you know. And from where I sit, I don't think, yeah, you need to write something on that.
Okay. I am suitably challenged, Oliver.
Right, right.
Yeah, I'll sit down and put together something and share it with you.
Yeah, and literally all said and done, as we have the conversation, the rest of us, this is it. The conversation we're having here to me is storytelling. And you know, when you are in the time, you know, how do you play yourself in the present? You know, how do you bring the past in the present in this particular case? We talked about, you know, the whole component that actually always help us really shape the story. And just listening to us, you know, on this particular story and be party to it. There's the aspect of the listener, you know, and you notice we are now becoming more enthusiastic. And the more enthusiastic we are, the more the trigger, you know, the narrator actually has, you know, because that's part of the storytelling. Remember, the storytelling
Yeah.
breaks the
Yeah.
wall. And so when you talk to us and we almost wanting to leave your world, you know, wanting to go back in time, you know, in this particular bit and just be there with you, it's like, hey, just reminded me there was at a particular time I listened to the story of a slave who escaped slavery and it was being read somewhere, I think. And so I just got glued on radio, you know, going back in time, you know, and the whole narrator was just simply taking you to the moment of, you know, what triggered these, you know, and the challenges the person had in escape. Like, hey, you want to live that particular time, you go back in time. Can we take people back in time? We can only take them back in time if we really shaped our story right.
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, can we move to our next person unless somebody has a question to this?
If you have any questions, please raise your hand or just unmute and ask a question. Wanjiku.
Go on.
And then Andrew.
Let's start with Wanjiku and then Andrew.
Okay. When you're talking today, Oliver, it feels like what hinders us as, do I say as Africans, as human beings, to express completely even the exciting parts that touch us is as the voice that we were talking about when we were having the physical workshop, that we already have this notion that this is what they want to hear. So then when you bring it, it's more of what you think they want to hear, not being very authentic with your own words, not being very authentic with your own story. And once you get comfortable, because like now when Ali, when you're giving feedback to Ali, he's more in it. He's even ready to even open up more. Yeah.
Right. And that's it. I feel Africans are more expressive. We are the best of the storytellers that there is, and I think we are almost the only ones who can tell our stories in other people's language the best way, and also tell their stories the best way. On occasions, what I like doing is just to have people tell the story in the language they are comfortable in. Because you have this journey now, like here, we have to do English, and our comprehension of English differs from person to person. And sometimes I feel it limits us, at the end of the day. So at times when I'm having such sessions, I feel like, hey, why can't we just tell stories in their language? Their first language, in this particular bit. And one very interesting thing, you are able to go that journey with them. But I will prefer doing that once they have reestablished the whole bit of shaping the story. But one thing I noticed that people don't have trouble shaping the stories when they are stuck within their first language. You listen to 5-year-olds tell stories in their first language and you're like, wow. But then now in our African context, we have that interruption where we have to acquire another language and be in a position to tell a story in another language. So that becomes one problem. Two, what you just put across, we've been made to speak another language by listening to the stories from other cultures. So you want to also present stories from other cultures because you think this is what your audience need to hear. And I think that's why we are here talking about African storytelling bit. And we need to understand ourselves from this particular concept before even just start moving to the point where you say, hey, because you are your story. So even before I start telling you to tell me stories about the African context, your African context, and probably within your own language in this particular case, because I really want people to enjoy their language. If your first language happens to be Swahili, that's good enough. The Luo, that's good enough. Can you enjoy that particular journey? Because you've been denied that particular moment of expressions, that actually really come. You've noticed that Indians will tend to stick to their mother tongue, and their movies still sell across the world, and when people are present in telling the story, when you do the interpretations, with those particular, inscriptions that you put in, sometimes you don't even read those inscriptions. You read once in a while just to get to know where they are. But we tend to watch those particular movies. Why? Because they are not denied of shaping their story because of a language, or they've not been removed from their context to tell a story from a different context, which they do not know how to fit in. And so they do what they think the audience will appreciate, as opposed to a story they need to relate with, so that the audience start appreciating. I don't know if I'm making sense here, and thanks for bringing out that. Andrew, 2 minutes, 1 minute.
My question is tied to what you've shared right now. You said that you have to understand your language first, or rather you have to be comfortable in your language before you can start shaping your story. If you're stuck in your language, then it's difficult for you to shape the story. So I just want to ask you, how do you start shaping the stories? What are the fundamentals? Because they're sort of coming out slowly as you're addressing what's working and what we're overlooking, where we're nervous, where we're anxious. So I see you're sort of unpacking it. But you do mention that a lot, that, you know, we're here to shape our story. Maybe just giving us an outline of how shaping your story looks like as we're going through this process.
Yeah, we went through that again, I believe, in our last bit. But in a simple line here, we're just simply asking ourselves, you know, what is the basic structure you are more or less engaging with here? If you don't have that basic structure, then, you know, in this particular basic structure, does the story has, for instance, a clear and engaging opening? And so if you're having a clear and engaging opening in this particular respect, will you run away from it or will you stick to it? What's the sequence of events? So what are the events that you really want to engage in this particular story? So this moves to this and this moves to this. You see, there is that particular story, but then within that particular story, we have events. If you listen to Ali at one particular point, he took us to his childhood activities, you know, back, you know, in Mariakani, and there was a lot about really being engrossed, you know, out there, and mama calling, you know, and all that, and how probably, you know, they would either respond or not respond, you know, depending on how they were engaged out there, how they were not indoor people because it was not, you know, this particular moment of fun. And he actually gave us very interesting, what I can call anecdotes about it. It's like, hey, I would really want to listen to that particular moment of his childhood and just simply stick to it and then have a closure to it. And so what we are having is that we lack to have closures to this particular narratives. Why? Because we've not really established that particular plot. And once we have that clear, then we move to probably words. And what we just talked about is now what we are really looking at now, and what Wanjika just brought in, you know, in this particular case. But then now, words alone, we talked about earlier, it's not enough. So we may talk about words, but at the end of the day, we should also talk about what? Innovation. And in innovation here, we are saying, you know, how do you use your language creatively, innovatively, you know? It's so interesting in the narration when you introduce the whole bit of getting married. You used a very interesting word that is not English, but somehow the audience understood it and was like, hey, getting the whole picture here. And so you are so much at home, you know, and there is no other word that would have brought it, you know, because when you talk about oral language going beyond words, that alone and the way you said it, the aspects of oral language informed our captivity. And to me, this is very important. So we could just talk about, establish the structure, you know, and then when I'm talking about words in this particular bit, you know, let's also just talk about the descriptive nature, the dialogue that really comes in and all that. We talked about this earlier. And then let's move to the whole element of innovation. And to me, if we get this right, Andrew, you'll have your fun.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
All right, then. That was such an intense second session. Thank you, Oliver. And thanks again, Ali, for sharing with us your story.
No.
I can't wait. We've got one more session left where we're going to be winding up everything that we've learned over the last two sessions with Dr. Oliver Mbayi. And hopefully we will be seeing you again for a live session. So do stay with us.
Yes.
We're going to come back for part 3.